let's talk about the safety issue. And we're going to also talk about sirolimus. So this is where paclitaxel and sirolimus, we know a lot about paclitaxel safety. We don't know yet as much about sirolimus. But on the safety issue, each of our countries approached it differently. I know I want to hear from Tatsuya, but my understanding is the PMDA never put a warning because they looked specifically in Japanese patients. And when there was some concern from the initial meta-analysis that suggested there may be an increased risk of mortality, the PMDA, which is, in my experience, normally very, very critical and very cautious, they didn't put out any guidance. I don't know what was the how did the Japanese doctors go forward, and was there any concern on your part?
Peter, thank you very much. Actually, as Peter mentioned, basically PMDA is very conservative and keeps the safety. Want to strictly control everything. But interestingly, after the original Katsanos publication, we discussed, then we finally found the Japanese specific data does not show the trend of the increased mortality signal. Therefore, PMDA does not show some of the restrictions and cautions. Therefore, we can continue the paclitaxel devices after the Katsanos publications. Therefore, the adoption of the paclitaxel device percentage is maintained since 2018 to the present. But everybody have a small concern. Therefore, we just launched the limus aerating balloons. Then some of the physicians say they try to gradually shifting to the limus due to this kind of the very small concern, and try to accumulate some of the data both of safety and efficacy.
Yeah, you know, in the U.S., the FDA took an interesting approach. So they did put out a letter to all doctors warning, oh, there could be a problem. But what they didn't do was they didn't put a black box warning, which is what they do when they have identified something that is a clear increase in risk. And they also didn't take it off the shelves, which they also could have done. They didn't do any of that. But in the U.S., the medical legal system is quite robust. And a lot of hospitals said, you can't use it now until it's cleared because we don't want medical legal implications later. Subsequently, we did get to work closely with the FDA, and they were very interactive about getting together all of the patient-level data on all the trials that have been done for approved devices to comb through to look for evidence of a mortality signal, and we didn't find any. And I think for me, you know, my interpretation of that is that there is none. I don't believe there is any, but it's also very hard to prove a negative. And I know both of you have done work on that, Yann in France and Joakim in Sweden. So the SWEDEPAD trial showed what?
Thank you. So first of all, I just want to say that I thought the American way of dealing with this problem was very impressive. So as a PI of SWEDEPAD, I had several interactions with the FDA during this process, and I thought they did an absolutely amazing job to the benefit of the US patients. So I think that was a very nice thing to witness. And we also, during this process, published an interim analysis from SWEDEPAD because we had to stop our trial immediately when the Katsanos publication was published for obvious reasons. So we had a almost 2-year break in the trial, first to acquire enough length of follow-up to be able to do our own interim analysis on this topic. And then it was a bit of a struggle to restart it because a lot of the key opinion leaders in Sweden were convinced that these devices were dangerous. So that was sort of a process. But we did publish that, and we did not show any mortality signal up to that point where we had data during the publication we did in the middle of this discussion. So I would say what we saw in the final results was the least desirable for me as a researcher, because we saw in the claudication subset an increased mortality rate up to 5 years, between 2 and 5 years, that on the Kaplan-Meier curve clearly differentiates, so the confidence intervals do not overlap in more or less the same time period that Katsanos claimed were the problem. And that's something we simply cannot ignore. We had to, of course, publish it and consider it, but it's still an enigma, I think, because we cannot so far come up with a explanation for this. But we are working a bit on cause-specific mortality patterns because we have access to that data. And I was very surprised by our findings, and more so that we did not see this in the CLTI population. And the only idea I have about that is that the high background mortality in CLTI might obscure a signal in those patients compared to the more favorable prognosis in claudication.
And it's interesting how every trial answers some questions, but then brings up some new ones.
Yeah.
And so, for example, in SWEDEPAD, when you look at SWEDEPAD 1 and 2, you have, even though the SWEDEPAD 1 was CLTI, there were twice as many patients entered originally. So at 5-year follow-up, there were more patients in SWEDEPAD 1 than in 2. There was no signal, no mortality signal at 5 years in 1, and then there was at 2. The other interesting thing about the whole issue is that no credible mechanism has ever been proposed. It's like magic. Something happens to you at that moment at 5 years that puts you at higher risk. I have a hard time to understanding what that means. So, Yann, you've also done nationwide studies in France of the same issue. What did you find?
In fact, for this kind of discussion and to draw any conclusion, we should have patient-level analysis. You did it with SWEDEPAD, and also with the meta-analysis, but also we should have real real-world data. In France, as many countries, like Sweden also, we have a large medico-administrative database. It's different from Medicare because 99% of the French population, so 70 million of people, is included in this medico-administrative database. So it's huge. And so we look at the patient treated by endovascular device between 2011 and 2019. And we are able to identify which device, which brand, and to follow up the patient. And so we release the data with a minimum of 2 years of follow-up. So the first patient was included in 2011. And for the last one, it was 2 years of follow-up. And we make different adjustments with different comparison. And we didn't see any signal of mortality using paclitaxel. Nothing. You should know that the DETECT study, which is the name of this study, has included 360,000 patients during at minimum 2 years on follow-up. It's still undergoing. This year, we have a minimum of 5 years of follow-up. Still, the first patient has been included in 2011. And we will go on, the follow-up in terms of signal of mortality. But I should say that also we will look at the efficacy a little bit, because we are able to, again, distinguish his device, and to have a complete follow-up of the patient. So in 2027, I will be able to tell you more about the DETECT outcomes. But due to the large amount of the patient, I think it's pretty strong in terms of database. And because also it is exhaustive, not just people more than 65 years old like Medicare.
I wanted to get your opinion also on this possibility of sirolimus. I mean, I think it's pretty exciting now, and this challenge of how to deliver sirolimus if it's not on a stent and it's being delivered by balloon. How will it be delivered? And we have now this idea of encapsulation or a delivery device using phospholipids, and we have a couple of different preparations. We don't have any available in the U.S., but there are a couple of trials enrolling. And then I know, Tatsuya, in Japan, you have already enrolled a trial, the Solution SFA. Tell a little bit about that trial.
Thank you very much. The Solution SFA Japan is ID trial of the sirolimus-coated DCB in Japan. So total 130 something patients were enrolled from 13 centers. The primary endpoint was 12-month primary patency, and also showed approximately 90% of the primary penetration in the 12 months follow-up. Then, interestingly, this good patency was maintained through the 3-year follow-up. Approximately 85% primary patency were observed, and also a very high rate of the freedom from TLR rate were observed in 1 year, 2 year, and 3-year follow-up. The efficacy of the limus-based DCB is maintained. Patency and the CTTR rate is a little bit different from the paclitaxel-coated plate. It's often gradually dropping time by time. I expected not only the safety, but also the efficacy. If we look at the very long-term phase, so limus possibly overcomes the weak point of the paclitaxel.
So far in Sweden, is it too early, or do you feel like you've had a good chance to incorporate sirolimus into your practice?
Well, I think it's a bit early, and we are still, struggling with interpreting the results from our trials. But I do think, and we also wrote that in the paper, that this might be, the next step in development for PID interventions. And it's maybe not just about the drug, but the coating and the excipients, and the technology is more mature in these second generation balloons that might make the procedure even more safe. So I think that's could be also an important add-on to the mere fact that we change drugs. And I do think that restenosis is our main problem. It's right. The problem in vascular surgery and in coronary surgery and every arterial surgical procedure. So we need to have a solution for that is safe and effective. And I think this is the most promising so far, together with the bioresorbable drug-eluting scaffolds. Because I also think that those devices, especially the ISPRI device, is very promising in the below-the-knee interventions.